They started as four boys from Liverpool and became the men who changed the world. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. Names that, together, formed a sound so powerful it transcended time, culture, and generations. But what was behind the songs that shaped a generation? What inspired lyrics like Yesterday, Let It Be, or Hey Jude? What made every note, every word, so human, so universal, so eternal? Today, you'll travel inside the minds of the Beatles to uncover the real stories behind their songs and understand why their music still moves hearts all over the world. Get ready, because this is the story behind the songs that changed the world forever. The birth of a sound. It all began in Liverpool in the late 1950s, a gray industrial city trying to rebuild after the war. But among the docks and the factories, a new sound was emerging. Teenagers with cheap guitars and wild dreams tried to imitate what they heard coming from America: Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, Little Richard. John Lennon was one of those dreamers, rebellious, witty, and restless. Paul McCartney, on the other hand, was disciplined, melodic, and quietly ambitious. When they met in 1957, it was like two opposite forces colliding, and from that collision came magic. They began writing songs together, not just copying their idols, but creating something entirely new, a fusion of rock's rebellion and Britain's melodic sensibility. Soon, they were joined by George Harrison, the quiet spiritual guitarist, and Ringo Starr, the charismatic drummer who completed the sound. The Beatles were born, and with them, a new era of music.
Love Me Do, the first spark. In 1962, the Beatles recorded Love Me Do, a simple, almost naive song, but filled with an authenticity the world instantly felt. Love, Love Me Do. Just 3 chords and a harmony that was impossible to forget. It was the beginning of a revolution. They didn't know it yet, but that small song would ignite what the world would soon call Beatlemania. Crowds screamed their names. At every concert, the noise from fans was so loud the band could barely hear themselves play. Radio stations played Beatles songs non-stop. And through it all, John and Paul kept writing, almost every day. Each song was a snapshot of their lives, a reflection of the times. The era of love songs. Between 1963 and 1965, the Beatles became the voice of young love. Songs like She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and All My Loving dominated the airwaves. But these weren't just songs about romance. They captured the innocence and optimism of a generation born after the war, a generation longing for freedom, joy, and peace. She Loves You wasn't only about love. It was about hope, about telling your friend, hey, love is still worth believing in. While the world danced, the Beatles grew up, and as they grew, their music evolved with them.
Help and the Weight of Fame. In 1965, John Lennon wrote Help, a song that sounded upbeat but was really a cry for help. Help me if you can, I'm feeling down. Behind the smiles and the global fame, John was lost. The Beatles couldn't walk the streets, couldn't rest, couldn't breathe without being chased. Help was his confession, the first sign that the Beatles were changing, both musically and spiritually. They began to experiment, to look deeper, and from that moment on, pop music would never be the same. Rubber Soul and the Inner Awakening. 1965's Rubber Soul marked the birth of the Beatles as true artists. They were no longer just pop stars. They were thinkers, poets, explorers. Songs like In My Life and Norwegian Wood showed a new kind of introspection, influenced by literature,
poetry, and even Eastern philosophy. George Harrison discovered the sitar and began his spiritual journey. John Lennon started reflecting on identity and purpose. Paul McCartney experimented with harmonies, structure, and storytelling. It was the sound of a band growing up with the world and leading that world into something new. Revolver, the Sonic Revolution. 1966 brought Revolver, an album that redefined what music could be. With producer George Martin, the band pushed every boundary imaginable. They used tape loops, backward recordings, psychedelic effects, turning the studio itself into an instrument. Songs like Eleanor Rigby showed that pop could be profound. Ah, Look at All the Lonely People, a song about isolation and humanity, set to a haunting string quartet. Each track on Revolver was an experiment in sound, storytelling, and meaning. And suddenly, everyone realized the Beatles weren't just making hits, they were building art.
Sgt. Pepper and the height of creativity. The Summer of Love, and the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, a record that forever changed the history of music. It wasn't just an album, it was a psychedelic journey, a complete artistic statement. Each song flowed into the next, creating a vivid portrait of imagination and identity. From Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds to A Day in the Life, the album was a masterpiece of surrealism, innovation, and emotion. For the first time, people listened to albums not as collections of songs, but as works of art. And the Beatles stood at the very top of that creative mountain. The spiritual journey. After the fame came the search for meaning. In 1968, the Beatles traveled to India, seeking peace and inspiration through meditation. There, George Harrison deepened his connection to Indian music and spirituality, while John Lennon began questioning fame, ego, and existence itself. Songs like Across the Universe emerged from this introspection, a gentle hymn to inner peace. Nothing's gonna change my world. Their music reflected the spiritual awakening of the late 1960s, the belief that peace wasn't found in the world, but within oneself. The Beatles were no longer just musicians. They had become philosophers of sound.
Hey Jude, a universal message. In 1968, Paul McCartney wrote Hey Jude, one of the most emotional songs ever recorded. It began as a message to comfort Julian Lennon, John's son, who was struggling with his parents' divorce. But what started as something personal became universal. Take a sad song and make it better. It was about healing, about turning pain into strength. And when the world sang along, Hey Jude became more than a song. It became a collective act of hope. A perfect example of what the Beatles always did best: turn pain into beauty. Let It Be, the farewell. By 1970, the Beatles were breaking apart. Creative tensions, business pressures, and personal differences had taken their toll. But before they said goodbye, Paul McCartney wrote Let It Be. Inspired by a dream about his late mother, Mary, the song carried a message of peace and acceptance. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me. It was the perfect farewell, gentle, spiritual, and timeless. A song not of defeat, but of release. And even though the Beatles ended, their story had only just begun.
The legacy that never dies. Decades have passed, yet the Beatles remain everywhere. Their music still plays, in movies, in cafes, in headphones around the world. They didn't just make songs, they created ideas. They proved that art can unite people, that creativity can heal, that music can change the world. From Love Me Do to Let It Be, they sang about what it means to be human, to love, to lose, to dream, to grow. John Lennon once said, "The Beatles' music is about love,
and love is the most important thing there is. And maybe that's why their songs still resonate, because they speak to the best part of us. The songs that changed the world. The Beatles were more than musicians. They were storytellers of a generation, mirrors of humanity, and architects of emotion. Every song told a story, from youthful dreams to spiritual awakening, from rebellion to reflection. They taught us that love can be revolutionary, that music can be art, that four young men with guitars could indeed change the world. As long as there's someone seeking hope, comfort, or inspiration, the Beatles will live on. And as Paul McCartney once sang, "And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make." That's the true legacy of the Beatles, the love they gave to the world and the love the world continues to give back. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone who loves real music. Because in the end, the story of the Beatles is the story of us all.